Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Bottom Rung with me, Kindar, the Tiger Right, as well as Ty. Today we are doing chapter 23. The archery field was empty in the middle of the night. Tibs and Jackal encountered a few late night wanderers on the way there. Only. Countered a few late night wanderers on the way there. Jekyll had pushed for the fighters' training field, which was closer, but it didn't offer the bales of hay where the targets hung to block the view from yet more late night walkers, more precisely, adventurers. With only Taurus and Claria looking down on them from on high, Jekyll placed a hand on the ground and the earth moved. Tibs stepped back as the hole formed, with the earth rising on three sides. How do you do it? He asked, awed. I pushed my essence into the ground and use it to move it. Don't you do it with water? Not enough essence to do much, Tibbs reminded the fighter. Why did they teach you that? He looked onto, into. Into the hole. It was deep enough that with only Claria for light, he couldn't see the bottom. It's part of how I can anchor myself while fighting. Wait, didn't you know I could do this? You're the one who said I'd have to dig a hole. I figured I could tell you how to do it, you know, with all that essence is everything thing, but I didn't realize you already knew. So you were going to tell me how, even though you aren't supposed to tell me anything about that essence is everything thing? Tibbs grinned. I'm a rogue. Rules are flexible around me. Fighter snorted. So, now what? Tibbs dropped into the hole and looked up. Even stretching, he couldn't reach the top. You said Earth is slow, right? So, give me an hour? Tibbs, you can't breathe the ground. You won't survive that long. Then, if I don't dig myself out before that, don't bother doing it for me. I don't think you're taking this as seriously as you should, Tibbs. When I bring the ground down on you, I'm going to try to leave a gap so there's air for you to breathe. Tiggs looked up, Jackal's head and shoulder a silhouette against the stars. I'm about to do something I've been told can't be done by someone who knows a lot more about this than I do. Earth might kill me just because I've already told water yes. If I think about it too seriously, I'm going to go crawl under a bed in terror. On the plus side, Jekyll said with a chuckle, You're the one who paid for the room. If I end up having to find another team, that's not my silver that's gone. You ready? Of course not. He nodded, then realized Jekyll might not see. Yes. He laid down. The ground shook, and the stupidity of what Tibbs was about to do flashed through his mind. The sides of the hole collapsed in on themselves, and Tibbs took a breath and held it as the weight of the earth increased over him. He didn't think Jackal had managed to leave him a gap, and even if he had, the weight pressed down on him so hard he couldn't move, not even to take a breath. And how was he going to get out of this if it worked? Jekyll had dug himself out, but he hadn't told Tibbs how he'd done that. He opened his mouth to yell to Jekyll to stop, and earth fell in it. He was going to drown in earth. He fought against it. It couldn't be packed so tight that he couldn't make his way out. He didn't want to die. He pushed harder, but any time he relaxed, the ground pushed back, was heavier, unmoving. In seconds, he found he couldn't move at all, not even to close his mouth, had filled with earth too, and was which had filled with earth too, and was pressing. In seconds, he found he couldn't move at all, not even to close. This is the end of a phrase. Not even to close his mouth, which had filled with earth too, and was pressing down on his throat. He thought he cried. Sorry, Mama. I didn't mean for it to end this way. And how? The voice was deep, slow, as ponderous as Tibbs imagined Earth would be. Did you? Before him was a form that was vast, dense. Think it would end. It was all the earth around Tibbs, pushed into the most solid aspect of themselves. Speak up, things of human, thing of human. Hello? Tibbs wasn't sure how the words formed. He still couldn't move his mouth. Water was. Tibbs felt a gaze focus on him. Right. You are small. You spoke with water? Tibbs wondered if he should slow down his speech to match that of Earth. Water spoke. Tibbs was about to ask when Earth continued, with me. So you know why I'm here? He asked excitedly. What I need? I do. The silence stretched, and Tibbs wondered if Earth was done talking or was just taking his time again. Will you give it to me? Why should I? The ground trembled around Tibbs. Because I need it, he yelled back. This time he was the one trembling in anger. I need the power to avenge Mama. The gaze slammed him in place. I do not avenge. Talk to fire. I will, but I'm here now. You have to give it to me. I do not give. Tib used the shaking Earth created to free his arm, which left him panting. He wondered if the town felt the earthquake. Jekyll hadn't been kidding when he said it felt like the whole world was on top of him. Can you even see? Earth stopped. Only the shaking of the ground telling Tibbs he wasn't alone. He waited, then opened his mouth, only for Earth to speak. What you want? Tibbs thought Earth was purposely being slower than he had to spite him. Then caught the mocking tone and focused on the words. I don't need meaning here. And focused on the words. Where was it? He'd focused so hard on convincing Earth to give it to him, it hadn't occurred to him that he'd have to do the work. Laughter rumbled around him, shaking everything. Poor thing of man. Small thing. How can you think you have what it takes? Tibbs missed it twice because he looked for something darker, but it was pale. It was right there before him, on the front of what he thought of as Earth's form. You see. So much surprise in too slow word. Tib almost took his eyes off his prize. I am impressed. And he was. Tibbs felt it in the resonance of the ground around him. No one sees sadness. Not for so long a time. Tibbs pushed toward it, but his arms barely moved. He'd never make it. It was useless. It is. Earth echoed his thought, and Tibbs glared at him. How dare he judge him for wanting to be stronger, for wanting to make those who had hurt Mama pay? He screamed as he pushed forward. Anger will. The pause made Tibbs think Earth was considering something, but he didn't care. He wouldn't be stopped by words. Burn you. Tibbs stopped. He wouldn't succeed through force, not against someone like Earth. He challenged him to win. He couldn't force his way. That didn't mean he had to lose. All things lose. Eventually, the street had taught him that, but it had also taught him that there were other methods than force to get what he wanted. He pushed the little essence he had over his hand, kept only as much of it as he could to avoid draining himself, and let the rest soften the earth. Now he could move it easier. I'm not losing today, Tib said through gritted teeth, feeling the water essence drain as his fingers finally closed over the pale shape. No, you are not. The shape melded into his hand, and he sensed the essence push its way through the water, make a space for itself within the void as well as on its surface. There was a new essence, where a new essence took residence. He looked up in the eyes of the element before him. I win, he said smugly. The gaze looked back at him. Tibbs thought he saw pride there and disappointment. Not yet. What had he missed? Tip searched around. He had the second part of the element. He was one step closer. Now all he had to do, all he had to, what if didn't let him, yeah, what if Earth didn't let him go? Not what I mean, the ground rumbled. Leave. And the ground around him shifted. Tib screamed and tried to grab onto anything to keep from being flung away. A hand closed around his and pulled. His head cleared the ground and he took a deep breath, only to hack up dirt. Jekyll held him, gently hitting his back. Well, I've got to hand this to you, the fighter said. You're not dead. Kinda wish I was, Tib said between coughs. Dirt tastes horrible. Have you had any success sensing water? Have you had any success sensing essence? Blah. Have you had any success sensing water essence? Alistair asked, sitting cross-legged before Tibs. They were back in the cavern, with the humidity pushing down on him. This time, his teacher had warned him, so Tibs wore simple clothing. A new set he'd bought from the tailor. They were worn and ripped in places, but better than anything he had before. Da, 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 da. Anything he'd had before since. Other than his shoes. Since the team been on, I hadn't keep the pieces. From the cache. They were worn and ripped in places, but better than anything he had before. It says the teams he'd been on hadn't let him keep any of the pieces of clothing from the cache. And it had been only thing he could afford. Once light change and everything needs to be readjusted. Now, long enough. And it had been the only thing he could afford. Okay. He kept his shoe. Kept on his shoes. I need to. What's going on here is by removing the name, I remove the easy way to identify what the shoes can do. But what they can do becomes important down the run. I think during the next run. So I need to establish that Tibs figured it out. I'm not writing I'm not writing a full scene just for that. Kept his shoes on because damn. Wait, what? That when? Oh, jeez. That is supposed to be wearing. That's quite the typo. When wearing them is steps made no noise. Regardless of how creaking roof was. And this is a reminder that he's a roof runner. He didn't care if the adventurers could tell what they were. That's not... The adventurers or any of the runners who had graduated to Upsilon care. Could tell they were magic. He didn't care. Okay, all right. He kept his shoes on. He kept on his shoes. No. Another place where my French creeps in. He kept his shoes because he'd realized that when wearing them, his steps made no noise, regardless of how creaking a roof was. He didn't care if the adventurers or any of the runners who'd graduated to Upsilon could tell they were magic. They'd been the first thing he'd found in the dungeon. He wasn't giving anyone a chance to steal them by leaving them anywhere unattended. You know what? Well, again, okay. All right. I don't need this. This is what I need. He wasn't giving anyone the chance to steal them by leaving them on anywhere by leaving them unattended. It's hard. He closed his eyes and felt around him. Here, the water essence was thick. There isn't a lot in the town. At first, I thought it was just because I couldn't do it. But then I did it next to a rain barrel, and I could feel it there, but not in the air. Only once I looked carefully, I could feel there was water essence in the air, just not a lot of it. Earth essence had been much easier to sense. The first thing he'd sense in the town, once he'd gotten over his... no, right, that's after. So yes, he can feel Earth essence at that point. Once he'd gotten over his audience, it has surprised him and scared him initially, until he realized he could shift from one element to the other. There wasn't as much as he'd expected. After all, wouldn't the ground all be Earth? It was what had given him the idea to test sensing water next to the rain barrel. Yes, that is why if you let it happen naturally in a place like the town or the dungeon or even most places in the world, your reserve will recharge slowly. There isn't a lot of for you to absorb unless you put effort in it. Would being in a lake make it go faster? It could, but not in a meaningful way. Remember, how much essence there is doesn't necessarily correspond to the physical representation of it we see. That's why we can and are always channeling some of it. We are? Yes. Every living thing absorbs and channels essence. Even people who don't train or graduate. They channel a very small amount of it. What happens with you and the others who train through the dungeon is that as you graduate, you make yourself aware of the essence and you can make channeling a conscious act. You can't stop channeling. If you could, you'd die. But now that you know about it's happening, you can work with it. You can increase what you channel or what that channeling accomplishes. Tibs considered asking what people who didn't train channeled. If they didn't pick one element, did they channel all of them? Did picking one mean sacrificing the rest? He wasn't sure how his teacher would react, so he went for a safer question. Isn't manipulating essence what sorcerers do? Alistair tapped his finger on his leg for a few seconds before answering. At this stage, yes. An Upsilon sorcerer is doing the same thing you are. He paused and smiled. Were. They are repeating actions and mindset by rote until they get the result they've been described. For you, fighters and archers, that will be the rest of your life. Right? For you, fighters and okay, for one thing, this is not capitalized. Archers, that will be what the rest of your life will that will be what the rest of your life will be. It's dialogue. Minus the by rote part. We're limited in what we can do because we prefer sticking to doing. Sorcerers are all about knowing things. It's led to some incredible thing, like how we can pull essence that isn't how they can pull essence that isn't theirs through objects containing it and meld it into their essence to produce incredible results. Doesn't that mean I should learn sorcery? I mean, I mean that I mean that I can learn sorcery even though I'm a rogue. It's just about studying essence, right? It certainly does look that way, doesn't it? Tibbs narrowed his eyes. That sounded like when his teacher was trying to get him to realize something on his own. Is it something else the guild controls? They say I'm a rogue and that's all I can be. Ah, but did the guild tell you that? Tibbs opened his mouth, then closed it. When I got to the town, they said to go to the teachers. But did they tell you which one to go? But they didn't tell you which one to go to, did they? Tim shook his head. Well, one told me to go to the fighters if I didn't know where I should be. But when I said I needed to be with the thieves, she didn't argue. One of the reasons the guild plucks many of its members, its new members from the criminal class. No, it isn't only when a new dungeon opens. That just makes the triage something it handles. It is that there's something about having to survive to the point you will break laws that refine who people are. We're too busy surviving to lie about what we are. I steal. I have no problem doing that. At my core, I'm a rogue. I am a rogue or a thief. Or a thief, if you prefer the more criminal descriptive. Now that I'm no longer busy surviving, I can wrap it into something that can pass for the common folk. He motions to himself. Tibbs looked the man up and down. Are your common folks nobles? Alistair inclined his head. True. The people I spend time with are higher than common folks. But underneath these clothes, I am a rogue. Some argue we're born into our classes, others say we pick them. However it happens, I'll die a rogue, as will you. You can try to set that aside, make a conscious decision to follow the path of the sorcerer. But even if you could, you'd be a step behind other sorcerers because until now, you were a rogue while they're already sorcerers. Then you'd have to find a way to unlearn what I taught you, because a sorceress can't think like a rogue. It'll keep you from progressing. Then how do the others do it? Not every adventurer starts as a criminal. What about the knights the kings have? The nobles have their own way to triage. They have tests of the body and the mind that lets them determine what class someone belongs to. A soldier won't last long if they can't pull all their being into it. Same with the other classes. But keep one thing in mind, Tibbs. Even without the dungeon, the adventurer who starts where you did will always surpass the noble because you didn't wait until it was proper to start that test and determine your class. Life gave you the test the moment your feet touch the street and has been training you every day of your life. Every day of your life. Being born low, street, as your general calls it, is not a pejorative. It's a mark of pride, a sign you are ready for what the guild will put you through. Tibbs nodded. It was easier to believe his teacher here, where the people treated him as something more than street. Back home, back on his street, he had trouble seeing any of that as something to be proud of. Alistair sighed. You did it again. What? You detoured your training. You have a knack for it. Tibbs shrugs. I don't know much, so I want to know more. Alistair smiled. A good attitude to have, no matter the class. Now, let's focus on what we came here for. drain your reserve. All of it? Tibbs asked nervously. It wasn't the physical exhaustion it used to be, but he still didn't enjoy it. Leave enough you'll be able to function. He made a small ball of ice and flicked it to the side, his breath catching as the essence vanished. Close your eyes and sense the essence around you. Once you have that, pull it into your reserve. Tibbs needed a few attempts before he was able to take mental hold of it, make it his, and draw the essence in. He watched as his reserve filled and he stopped after a few seconds. Good, Alistair said. What would happen if I kept pulling essence into my reserve once it's full? Can I overfill it? In your specific case, I don't know. But as a concept, that is what graduating row is about. You shouldn't be telling me that, should you? Alistair chuckled. I've made it clear to Tyrannia that I'll use whatever method I see fit to ensure you survive. If that involved breaking a few of the guild's precious rules, well, I am a rogue. Tibs reached for the essence around him, mentally took hold of some and pulled, only for it to fall apart and flow through his mental fingers. He tried again. This was what he'd done before. He should be able to. Unless his reserve being full was the cause. But that would mean the essence somehow knew what he intended, and all he was trying to do was practice reaching and pulling. On the fifth attempt, he paid attention to how it slipped through his fingers and realized it was being pulled apart. He looked at his teacher, who had an overly innocent look on his face. You're doing this. I am. Something you can do when you are able to sense essence. If you're skillful enough, you can steal it away from someone else. But they have their reserves, so that doesn't matter until they try to replenish it. If you can force an opponent to remain drained, the fight is easier to win. But that only works against the same essence I already control. It's not going to do me any good against an earth or firefighter. You notice the neutral look on Alistair's face, right? You need to remember that at its core, essence isn't the element. It's just essence. Once you become skilled enough, you'll be able to sense that baseness that is at the core. You'll never be able to take it in and to recharge your reserve or manipulate it the way others can, but you can affect it enough that with training, you can keep someone from drawing in their essence. That isn't a row thing, is it? Alistair laughed. Most certainly not. Some manage it at Epsilon, most need to reach Delta. He settled down. Now, I want you to empty half your reserve. Tibs flicked an ice pebble away. Fill your hand with the rest of the fill your hand with the rest. It's not going to drain it. That's fine. It isn't the point of this exercise. Now, while shifting the water over your hand, move the essence, not the hand. I want you to reach for the essence around you and refill your reserve. I can't, Tibs frowned. If I'm focusing on the essence in my hand to move it, I can't also reach the essence around me. Reach for the essence around me. Do you trust me as your teacher, Tibs? Of course. Then I am telling you it can be done. How? Alistair sighed. That I can't tell you. Just like how you move from filling your reserve as a torrent of water to this static reserve. This is something only you can figure out. Even if I could find the words to explain how I did it, they'd be meaningless to you. And we both need to keep your age in mind. It is you know what? It is possible you can't do this just yet. Again, this is something normally taught to those who have graduated to. That's not capitalized. That doesn't have to be capitalized. That have graduated to a row. Tibs nodded. If his age was a real problem, which Tibs didn't think it was, he wouldn't be able to do what he'd already learned. Alistair thought it was because of how little reserve Tibs had. But he only had a little because that void took most of it. And gaining a small reserve of earth essence hadn't cost him anything of the water essence he had. He focused on the water in his hand. That was simple. The act felt natural, like it was part of his hand, but when he did, he lost the sense of the essence around him. Try as he might, he couldn't regain it without first letting go of the water in his hand. That's going to be enough for today. Tibs looked at his teacher and realized he had a headache and he had trouble focusing on his eyes. No, he had trouble focusing his eyes. Alistair helped him to his feet. For the next few days, we'll focus more on more rogue-related skills, but I want you to work on this in your free time. We won't be able to move on to the next exercise I have in mind until you're able to draw in essence while manipulating some. Can I come here? I'm afraid not. No one is allowed here without supervision until rank Delta, and I will be busy myself. He considered something. Use a tankard of water as the source of essence. Learning to work with little is also something that's going to be good. Oh, that is so funny, Tim grumbled. Working with little. Alistair chuckled. It is, isn't it? Tibs seriously considered seeing if he could plant a knife in his father's back at that moment. His father? No. Tibs seriously considered seeing if he could plant a knife in his teacher's back at that moment. And this concludes chapter 23 of Bottom Rung. If you are enjoying this, please subscribe and hit the bell. Hit the thumbs up and share with your friends. If you want to read the story, it's on Royal Road. The link is in the notes, as is the link to my Patreon, should you want to support me. And with that, I will wish you a good day.